conversation coming up for you all about the SNOMED CT system, and I'm here with two really interesting gentlemen here with me today. So we've got John Lord, the MD of Sim Trainer, and Robbie Burns, the watch manager of Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service. So first of all, question for you, John. Can you tell us why it's so imperative that leaders of the first response community are actively pursuing that 100% registration for all staff that they have health and safety responsibility for?
Kelly, yeah. The thing about the SNOMED codes is that it will make a fundamental difference to the way that people are treated at their GP surgery, the first link in the chain. The idea of SNOMED going onto somebody's health record is that it signposts a GP to actually consider more than just what the person's presenting with. All responders, specifically firefighters, started the process off where we've identified through worldwide studies, scientific and medical, an enhanced risk of cancer from contaminants. Logically, the people that work with us, paramedics, police officers, must also have an exposure as well. But the point is that if the GPs don't use the SNOMED code, then it's likely that people are going to be missing out on accurate diagnosis. So that's really why we want to see all firefighters and other responders looking at the SNOMED codes, taking them to their GP and saying, please put that on my record. I want an accurate diagnosis.
Do you agree with that, Robbie?
I would indeed, yeah. It's a huge thing, something that needs to be addressed across the board. So it's not, as John just said, it's not just firefighters that you see going out on red fire appliances in your neighbourhood. Every airport has a fire service. Commercially, most oil platforms, etc., have a fire service. We are all at risk, and it's a huge risk. We're something like 4 times more likely to succumb to an illness than the general population. You've got to bear in mind, 1 in 2 of us will unfortunately get a cancer diagnosis in our life. This compounds that massively, to the point where we are affected by our reproduction system is being affected now. So a male sperm is affected and will pass on that DNA link. This needs to be addressed. We need to address from a GP's perspective. They don't have time to read the Lancet. We know the situation, the current fairly dire situation, it's fair to say, of the NHS. Those GPs won't have time to look at these new publications on a weekly or monthly coming from the World Health Organization, for instance, who have now declared firefighting as carcinogenic to humans at the highest level. So if we don't inform our GPs, they won't be informed.
And what are your hopes for the commitment of the sort of Fire Brigades Union and, of course, other rep bodies when it comes to increasing awareness of using SNOMED CT? And how's that drive going, Robbie?
Sure. So the Fire Brigades Union have taken this on now. They're running with it, and it's moving at a rate of knots, which is fantastic. It was quite quiet across the board for a number of years, it's fair to say. But it's about the wheels turning slowly in every organisation. The FBU is quite a big organisation, so they are absolutely on board now. There are template letters that individual members can then respond to their GPs with. Other rep bodies are still quite slow, I think. It's a new message, to be fair. Although, if we look back, I think the US Fire and Rescue Service in 1982 declared firefighting as carcinogenic to humans with the reference codes that they had to their GPs. The UK Fire and Rescue or UK PLC emergency services need to be quicker at this. It's a double-edged sword, really. I mean, we need the treatment. We will get treatment. Life expectancy is very poor for UK Fire and Rescue Service members. But if we're treated earlier, because our SNOMED codes are on our records, we will live longer because we'll be found to have disease at an earlier, much earlier level that is treatable. So lots of noise from the unions. Over to you, John.
I think there's another point to make, is that statistically we know that if we find cancer at stage 1, a lot of cancers, 96% of people will return to work. If we find it at stage 4, only 22% will return to work. So organisationally, it makes sense that we catch cancers early. That saves on recruitment, saves on retraining, saves on so many on-costs. It just makes financial sense to catch cancer early through screening and through prompt treatment at your GP. The protectors of society, firefighters, police officers, ambulance people, shouldn't be fighting to get the best healthcare that they can when they highlight they've developed an issue that potentially could be life-changing or life-ending.
Can you tell us why the SNOMED CT system is applicable to so many first responder groups, especially when there could be a risk factor involved?
So, I mean, ultimately, if you look at all the responder groups, let's take an obscure one like the Coast Guard. One of the Coast Guard teams I work with said, well, we don't go to fires. And I said, but if you think about it, you had a trawler fire last year that you went and provided security for, and you told me you were stood in the smoke. So there's an exposure there. You get police officers regularly going into properties because they're passing when the incident begins. You get paramedics treating smoke victims coming out of a property. They're up close and personal with them. The off-gassing, the contaminants coming off the skin, the breath, the clothes, they're in close proximity doing those medical interventions. So SNOMED for me, there's one code for firefighters and there's one code for occupational exposure to toxic agents. Obviously the firefighter one applies to firefighters, and as Robbie alluded to, that's aviation firefighters, that's industrial firefighters, that's local authority and specialist units. But it's also then on the second one, all the other responder groups.
And Robbie, so how would you summarise the importance of using SNOMED CT to improve outcomes?
So I was diagnosed, unfortunately, with bladder cancer, aged 40. I initially went to see my GP with something called hematuria, which is blood in my urine. It was macroscopic, so it's quite a low level and it wasn't visible to the naked eye. However, it was present. My GP at the time, again, hadn't had time to read the Lancet, potentially didn't know about SNOMED codes, treated me with a urine infection. Had he known, or she known as a GP section, that we are now much more exposed then, if you like, to at least seven types of disease, I feel I would have been treated much quicker in a much more robust manner. So I was treated with antibiotics, as I said. Some 18 months later, that dwell time was enough for my cancer to be a fist size in my bladder. So had I had the SNOMED code, had they seen that and recognised that, I feel I'd have probably had a CT scan fairly quickly. That's the significance of this. I have had multiple recurrences, 30 surgeries, that I feel probably wouldn't have been needed had that walnut been cracked on day one of my diagnosis. That's how important it is.
I've got another example too, where at one of the airports, one of the guys had a screening test. His PSA came back elevated. He was very fortunate in that his GP knew of SNOMED codes, and within 4 days he'd got him booked in for an MRI. The MRI then come back, diagnosed not prostate cancer but an enlarged prostate. He's now on screening. So that's an example where it worked very, very quickly and very, very well.
What do you think are some of the perceived barriers to using SNOMED codes, and is there a better way to encourage staff to use it?
I don't think the issue rests with the staff. I think from what my experience is, once people know this exists, they're quite happy to take it. The barrier in my eyes is entirely at the surgery level, at the GPs. Professor Anna Steck said that when she did an ad hoc survey, only 50% of the NHS were using the SNOMED codes. So we need government intervention through the Department of Health to say, this is a compliance requirement on digital record keeping within the NHS. Why are you not using the SNOMED codes? The GPs need to be educated and say, get these SNOMED codes on our records. And I would encourage people, if you run into that barrier, tell the GP you're going to register it as a complaint under the patient liaison system.
Robbie, how about you? Anything to add there?
Yeah, I think there are. So from an operational firefighter's perspective, I think, John, you did a 32-year, you had a 32-year career in the fire service?
32, yeah.
So a fairly stellar career. I'm still fairly young in this game, obviously. I've only had 18. But from an ops perspective, I'm still ops. I still go to fires. We have a risk appetite in the fire and rescue or emergency service, and the cliche is that we run in when everyone runs out. So it doesn't happen to us. We will happily-ish go into a burning building and rescue little Johnny from the first floor, without any real consideration for that acute or indeed chronic risk that we associate that with. Adrenaline, we're very well trained, we have that dump of endorphin, so we have that physical ability to go in and do that, where perhaps some people don't. But we won't take these codes on until we're badgered. I've noticed I think less than 20% of my service have actually taken these forward because we're lazy. Firefighters are extremely lazy when we're on a fire station. We are the best people in the world when we're on a fire ground. We are explosively good. But we won't have a shower at 3 in the morning because it's too much challenge. I've had a car fire, but I'll just go back to bed. So these things need to be addressed. The cultural change needs to be addressed at that my age limit, really. So 18, 20 years in, well, I'm all right, Jack. It won't affect me, but it does affect us. So I absolutely agree. The NHS must do more. Anecdotally, I was diagnosed and had some surgery 12 years ago, and I was seen within 2 weeks. I had surgery within 2 weeks. I had a recent unfortunate diagnosis not that long ago, and it took 62 days to get the same process. So the NHS is a 4 times greater wait now for surgery. So a number of reasons for that, really. Don't be ill in the first place. Use your SNOMED codes to get that stage 1 cancer instead of the stage 4, grade 4, whatever it is. It's an easy thing. You literally contact your GP with these codes and say, I want those codes on my record, and it's done. It's a phone call. Cultural change as well as the NHS engagement for me.
And so how great is that need to kind of address the whole message of contaminants from a cultural change perspective? Then it sounds massive.
It's absolutely enormous. If you look at the country, how many police officers, firefighters, ambulance staff there are, and don't forget that there's also the risk that we might be taking home contaminants on our clothes and affecting the family. And there's an American study that has shown that link. So it is absolutely imperative that we protect the protectors. As Robbie said, I served 32 years, but I still work predominantly with airports now. It's so important that everybody, if we're going to go to the doctors, that we get the best treatment, because those people that are rushing in when everybody else is rushing out, they need to know that if they do become ill because of the job they're doing, they're going to be treated properly. Just a point that we just covered a minute since. There is a fear. When you talk about cancer, there is a fear about not wanting to know, almost the ostrich syndrome, bury your head in the sand. Once you've had cancer, you're not frightened of the word because you know what's behind it. So there is a reticence from some sectors to actually want to know more. They'd sooner be ignorant of it.
It's incumbent on every principal manager, every principal officer and their officers to pass this message. And it isn't any more guidance, I feel. This is mandated. If a firefighter turned up on my fire ground and wasn't in the right PPE, I would stop them from going in. That would be my duty of care to them under the Health and Safety at Work Act. This is the same. There is no difference here. This is no longer guidance. This is, if you join our sector, if you join our fire service, you must register your details with your GP. If your GP isn't able to accept that, I know devolved governments at the moment have different SNOMED code type scenarios, but the NHS UK should have this across the board. And if they don't, they should be ostracised for that, as already mentioned. So it's incumbent on us as individuals to do this for our own health and safety, but if we're not doing it, we need our managers to make us do it. It's no longer, have you done it, or whatever. It's now, if you don't do it, there is a retribution almost, I feel.
What do you think would lead to a better take-up of the SNOMED code, to an essentially risk-tolerant first responder community?
I think the reality is listening to people who have used it and have had great outcomes. We already have 2 from Biggin Hill, where, without naming names, who have had 2 really good outcomes through using SNOMED. I think if we can publicise the positives of using SNOMED, that will encourage others to actually go to the GPs and fight the corner, because, as Robbie says, the NHS is not the NHS that I'm similar. I've had 10 operations. It isn't the same as it was 10 years ago. So we need every little bit of help that we can to get into the system and beat the disease.
Skipping queues, we'll wait our turn. This is more of a diagnostic, so we will wait for our surgeries, but as John has already alluded to, we will get back to work quicker. We will be an asset to you as individuals who pay your council tax if we are seen at a reasonably quick time scale and are treated as much as we can with the information we've got. So the information's out there, we just need to have that embedded. So any platform like this, in fact, anybody who's listening who is willing to let us talk, this is such a big message. We're not being paid for this. We're here of our, our own free will, not under duress, I have to state as well. So we're here to try and share that actually don't be me, don't be John. We can change this.
I've noticed at the show there's a firefighters PPE stage and there's lots of kind of focus on contaminants. Do you think that's a great asset to the show?
It's changed, and it needs to. So much work is being done. PGI and other manufacturers are really working hard to reduce the contaminants exposure. The fire appliances, the same. We've just got to marry everything together now. And if I had one wish, it would be to break silo working. That the NFCC, the airports, the industrial side, chemical sites, get their heads together instead of trying to deal with it in separate groups, because that is what's happening to some degree.
And that stems from the Home Office. So we're in a good place at the moment. The Home Office has commissioned a report onto all literature that has happened in the UK over the last 10 years, and there will be a finding shortly. The World Health Organization has said that firefighting is carcinogenic to humans at the highest level. It's a 1A. It doesn't get any higher than that. Firefighting is carcinogenic to humans. So we are putting ourselves in harm's way up to 4 times more likelihood. So this needs to be from the Home Office perspective now that it's a thing. It's asbestosis of the 2020s. It really is. It's as significant as that. I don't know of anybody that has mesothelioma, luckily, because we've put control measures in place to deal with that asbestosis risk. To a degree, it still slips through. But we don't have shipyards with people playing with asbestos anymore because we've acknowledged it. This is an acknowledgement piece from here too. This is as big as asbestos, without a shadow of a doubt, and needs to be treated accordingly. It's a hazard.
Plenty of noise going on here. Obviously, it's a live show. And as a kind of live show, why is the Emergency Services Show such an important venue and space for you to come and visit?
So I'd like to thank the NEC actually, and David Brown in particular, for allowing us a stall. We have a stand here free of charge, I have to say, and for this platform to come and speak. So it's a growing event, and I love it. I'm a small child at heart, and I always wanted to be a firefighter. So I'm going to go and kick some tyres in a moment. But it is a great platform for all things new. Innovation is happening on a daily, and innovation is key to the contaminants measures also. Some of the PPE stalls, stands, particulate fire protection, for instance, is developed on the back of the noise that's being made by us and others. I think friction is heat, and we need some heat. This place is absolutely the mecca for all things new. So fantastic platform.
Brilliant. Thank you, gentlemen, very much indeed. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
So,